Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Rebel Nutritionist Podcast. Today we are talking about the name change from PCOS to PMOS, a name that finally tells the truth. And so I want to start today by asking you a question. Have you or has someone you loved ever been handed a diagnosis, given a prescription, and essentially sent home with like a shrug of the shoulders and sent home with no real answers about what's going on? Maybe you were told to lose some weight. Maybe you were put on birth control hormones to regulate things. Maybe you were told things like, this is just how it is for some women, or even worse, that your symptoms were stress-related or exaggerated and dismissed as, well, just part of being a woman. If that resonates with you, if that hits somewhere deep, then today's episode is specifically, intentionally, and unapologetically for you. Because something happened 2 weeks ago that I've truly believed in for years, and I've been saying for years. Now we finally have some answers. Because on May 12th, 2026, a landmark paper was published in The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. And it officially renamed a condition that affects over 170 million women worldwide. You know it as PCOS, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. And as of this month, it has a new name, PMOS, Polyendocrine Metabolic Ovarian Syndrome. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, they changed the name, so what? Does the name change really mean anything? And I'm going to tell you that in medicine, yes, it absolutely does. Because a name determines what doctors look for, what they test for, what specialists get involved, what research gets funded, and how patients are actually treated. The wrong name leads to the wrong treatment. And for 80-something years, millions of women have been living with the wrong name and therefore the wrong approach to their health. Today, I'm going to break all of this down. We're going to talk about the science, the research, the history, what this means for diagnosis, what this means for treatment, and most importantly, what it means for every woman who has ever felt dismissed, reduced, or defined by a label that didn't even accurately describe what was happening inside her body. This is your vindication, and now it's your roadmap forward. So let's get into it, okay? Let's talk about the backstory because we really need to address 80 years of the wrong name, okay? So let's go back to where it all started because the context here truly does matter. The condition we've been calling PCOS was actually first described in 1935 to physicians Stein and Leventhal noticed a cluster of symptoms in women such as irregular periods, elevated male hormones, and what appeared to be enlarged ovaries with multiple small cyst-like structures on them. They named what they saw Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. Poly meaning many, cystic meaning cysts, ovary, well, that's where they thought the problem lived. And here's where the trouble began. Because what they were seeing on the ovaries, they weren't actually cysts, not in the traditional sense. They were small, immature ovarian follicles, essentially little tiny eggs that had started to develop but never fully matured, never ovulated, and never released. They kind of just stalled out. So the question, which is what we should have been asking for decades, was why? Why are these follicles stalling? What is disrupting ovulation? What is happening upstream of the ovary that's actually creating this picture? And the issue is that that question was not asked, nor was it asked loudly enough, because the name said it all. This is an ovary problem. This is a gynecological issue, a women's reproductive thing. And so it was handed off to gynecologists, and the treatments were gynecological. Birth control to regulate cycles, medications to induce ovulation, for fertility for some, and maybe for some lifestyle advice, and maybe for some metformin, okay? But the real story, the metabolic story, the neuroendocrine story, the inflammatory story, that was largely left off the table, untouched, unexplored. Now, the renaming process, because look, this did not happen overnight, and it's really extraordinary in its scope. Because in 2015, a group of researchers and patient advocates began formally pushing for a name change. Now listen, 2015, right? More than 10 years ago. So what followed was the most extensive, rigorous medical renaming process ever undertaken in history, actually. So it's been over 14 years across 6 continents involving 22,000 stakeholders, meaning patients, clinicians, researchers, patient advocacy organizations, professional medical societies, 56 organizations in total. They administered surveys in 2017 and again in 2023, and a final massive survey to nearly 15,000 people in 2025. They ran workshops, they tested candidate names, they asked, what do people need from a new name? And the top answers, well, let's avoid stigma, let's be scientifically accurate, let's reflect what's actually happening in the body. So 3 finalists emerged, and PM and PMOS, Polyendocrine Metabolic Ovarian Syndrome, won by a landslide. And the paper was published in The Lancet, led by Professor Helena Teede at Monash University in Australia, and endorsed by the Endocrine Society and organizations across the globe. And the rollout is planned over 3 years with updates to clinical guidelines used in 195 countries. This is clearly not a small tweak. This is a seismic shift in how medicine understands and frames this condition. But look at how long it took to get here. All right, so we're grateful that it's here, okay? But let's break down the new name for real humans who need to understand what it's about, okay? So I'm going to translate it because it actually does say what a good name should do. It tells the truth. The polyendocrine part, this means multiple hormone systems are involved. Not just estrogen and progesterone, not just the ovaries. We're talking about insulin, androgens, which are the male hormones, cortisol, thyroid function, the hypothalamic pituitary axis, the brain hormone connection. This is a condition that reaches into virtually every endocrine system in the body. Now let's look at metabolic. This is the word I want every person listening to hear loud and clear. Metabolism is at the center of this condition, and I've been saying this for years. This is how your body produces, processes, and responds to energy. How your cells talk to insulin, how your liver processes hormones, how your blood sugar behaves. This is a metabolic condition first, and the reproductive and hormonal symptoms are downstream effects of that metabolic disruption. I've been saying this for years, and I'm not saying it to prove anything, really, other than to say when you start to look downstream and start to look at root causes, it becomes very clear to a well-trained practitioner that there is more than meets the eye, or should I say more than meets the name, okay? Now let's get to ovarian, because yes, the ovaries are involved. They are affected, but they are the site of the symptom, not the source of the problem. That's a big difference, right? The ovaries are showing you what's happening upstream. They're not where the story starts. And syndrome, well, that just means a cluster of signs and symptoms that occur together with a shared underlying mechanism, even if the presentation looks different from person to person. So the new name doesn't change what's happening in anyone's body. What it changes is the conversation, and the conversation is what determines the care. And we desperately need to change, or needed to change, the conversation. Consider this: PMOS is estimated to affect 10 to 13% of women of reproductive age worldwide. That's 1 in 8 women. More than 170 million people. And the World Health Organization estimates that 70% of those women are undiagnosed. That means 7 out of 10. That is a staggering and, frankly, I think, unacceptable number. And a significant part of why so many women go undiagnosed, it's because the old name sent doctors looking in the wrong direction. And I can tell you this because this has happened to so many of my clients that I've treated over the years, right? So it's just mind-boggling to me. So what is actually happening in the body? Let's really talk about what's happening, okay? Because we get to the part that I find both frustrating, right? Because this has been known and underutilized for so long, but also deeply exciting because the science is significant and the opportunities for healing are real. So what is going on in a woman with PMOS? I want to start at the foundation because context here really matters. And I really want you to hear this because insulin resistance is the master driver here. Insulin resistance is the cornerstone of PMOS. And I want to say something that challenges conventional medicine practice right now is that insulin resistance is present in the vast majority of women with PMOS, including lean and thin women, including women who are at a normal weight, including athletic women, and including women who eat well. The idea that this is a condition of overweight women who just need to lose a few pounds, this is outdated, oversimplified, and has caused real harm through misdiagnoses and misdirected treatment and stigma. So important. Now, what is insulin resistance in plain language? Well, let's talk about this, okay? Insulin is a hormone that is made by your pancreas. Its job is to act like a key. It unlocks your cells so that glucose can get inside the cell and be used for energy. In insulin resistance, the lock is getting stuck, or insulin's knocking at the door of your cell and your cell saying, nope, sorry, you can't come in, okay? Your cell, for some reason, stops responding normally to the insulin signal. So what happens? Your pancreas does what it's designed to do. It makes more insulin trying to force the door open, okay? And while blood sugar can stay relatively controlled, at least for a little while, because there's a compensation, the problem is that high insulin doesn't just sit around we're waiting around to get into the cells. No, okay? Insulin acts like a master signal through the entire body. And in the context of PMOS, it's one of the most significant things, in the context of PMOS, one of the most significant things it does is stimulate the ovaries to produce more androgens, those male hormones, right? More testosterone, more DHEA. And most of those hormones in excess, too many of them, will disrupt ovulation. It'll cause irregular cycles. It'll trigger acne. It'll cause hair growth in unwanted places and hair loss where you want to keep it. High insulin also suppresses a liver protein. It stops the liver protein called sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG for short. This protein is essentially a chaperone for hormones, meaning it binds to testosterone, to free testosterone, and keeps it inactive. It keeps it from doing its job. But when SHBG drops, free testosterone rises. Why? Because there's not enough SHBG to hold on to that testosterone. So when free testosterone rises, that is a problem. Even if your total testosterone looks normal on a standard lab panel, free testosterone can be elevated that cause your symptoms. And a conventional doctor dismisses this because they're not testing free testosterone. They're testing total testosterone. So you're dismissed because your labs look fine. And this is the insulin androgen loop. High insulin drives high androgens. High androgens disrupt ovulation. And then the follicles stall and the cycle perpetuates itself. This is the core mechanism of PMOS, and it starts with insulin, not with the ovaries. A 2025 research paper published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine and authored by Parker, Britton, and Gersh explicitly calls for a paradigm shift away from a glucose-centric model of management towards an insulin-centric model. And they argue that by the time blood sugar is dysregulated, by the time it shows up, insulin resistance has often been present for years. And look, we've seen this, okay? So targeting insulin, not just glucose, is the key to early identification and, more importantly, early intervention. And here is where we in functional medicine have pretty much been right all along, because we test fasting insulin. We look at something called HOMAIR and C-peptide. We look at the whole picture, not just fasting glucose. We need to look at free insulin and all of that, not just hemoglobin A1C. We look at insulin because insulin tells us what is happening before the damage is actually done. Okay? Hopefully you followed me through that. If not, go back and re-listen to this because it's so important to understand that. Okay? But, all right, on to the next thing. Let's talk about the HPA axis, because this is when stress joins the party. And we're going to layer in what we call the neuroendocrine piece, right? What's going on neurologically and hormonally. Because in PMOS, it's not just a metabolic condition, it is also a stress physiology condition. So the HPA axis is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is your body's stress response system. When you perceive stress, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, or even the psychological stress of blood sugar dysregulation, for example, this system activates and releases cortisol, okay? So stress in many ways causes the release of cortisol. Cortisol in short bursts is your friend, right? It mobilizes energy. It reduces inflammation. It helps you respond to challenge and stress. But in chronically elevated cortisol, that's a completely different story. And so, again, we talk about like the survival mode that we are all in day to day, okay? We see chronic cortisol elevation all day long in our clients, because think about the world that we live in. Think about what pressure people put on themselves. Like chronic cortisol elevation drives blood sugar up because cortisol tells the liver to release glucose for that fight or flight energy demand. And remember, fight or flight could be emotional, physical, psychological, all of that, right? So that glucose that's being released for what we think is the fight or flight, that will drive insulin up, which will then drive your androgens up. And now you're back in the loop. So cortisol also directly stimulates androgen production from the adrenal glands, independent of the ovaries, right? So it's not just in the ovaries. So women with PMOS who also have high stress and poor sleep or a history of trauma, they're dealing with a dual source of androgen excess, meaning it's coming from the ovary and it's coming from the adrenal. And unless a practitioner is looking at the full picture, you're missing the mark, right? We need to look at things like the Dutch hormone panel because there are adrenal markers in there. We need to see what we call diurnal cortisol curve. And if you're not looking at that and you're just like testing cortisol in the morning, you're going to miss it. So this is why I've said PMOS is not just a gynecological condition. It is a whole body neuroendocrine condition. And if you treat only one part of the system without addressing the whole thing, it's like trying to put a Band-Aid on a leaky faucet. Okay? So remember that. Now let's go on to the gut microbiome connection, because this is something that often surprises people, is that the gut is profoundly involved in PMOS. And I want you to know that research shows that women with PMOS consistently demonstrate altered gut microbiome composition. They show reduced microbial diversity, right? The good guys, there's not enough of them. Overgrowth of certain inflammatory species, and impaired gut barrier integrity, something we call leaky gut. And here's something that genuinely surprises people when I bring this up too, is that your gut is not just digesting food, it is actively managing your hormones. There's actually a collection of gut bacteria called the estrobolome, however you want to say that, right? Estrobolome. And their entire job is to process estrogens and androgens and determining whether those hormones get cleared from the body or recirculating back into the bloodstream, right? So this world inside your gut is determining whether your hormones you get rid of them or they get recirculated. On top of that, the microbiome is also regulating inflammation in the whole body, not just in the gut. And it shapes how your cells respond to insulin, how they produce short-chain fatty acids that actually act as metabolic protectors. Short-chain fatty acids hang out in the lower part of the colon, and they literally help drive metabolic processes. So when your entire gut ecosystem is disrupted, all of that goes sideways, and so does PMOS. And so when the gut is disrupted, inflammation increases, and chronic low-grade inflammation is another driver of insulin resistance. The gut, the metabolism, the hormones, they are in constant communication. So you can't treat PMOS without thinking about gut health. And one more thing I want to address before we move on, because this is a major reason why PMOS is so underdiagnosed. This condition does not look the same in every woman, like not even close, okay? On one end of the spectrum, you have the classic presentation: irregular or absent periods, weight gain, especially around the middle, elevated androgens with acne and facial hair, difficulty getting pregnant. Like, this is the picture many doctors have come to recognize. But guess what? On the other end, we have lean women, athletes, high-achieving women with regular periods, no visible androgen symptoms, who have significant insulin resistance and a predisposition to metabolic disease that is like flying completely under the radar. Women who have mild cycle irregularities are dismissed as just stress. This is just stress, right? Because they look fine on paper technically. And then guess what? There's everything in between, because PMOS does not have one face. It has 4 recognized subtypes, and some women have the full picture: elevated androgens, irregular cycles, follicle changes on an ultrasound, for example, and others have just 2 of the features. Some have barely anything visible on imaging at all. And I've seen women all the time who have no cysts, and they're the ones who get dismissed because they don't have that, but the hormonal and metabolic disruption is so real, and it is consequential. And so this is what the name change does for those women. The old name, PCOS, essentially trained doctors to look for the cysts. If the ultrasound didn't show them, the diagnosis is off the table, which meant millions of women walked out of appointments without answers, without support, without a single person connecting the dots for them. So the new name reorients everything. Polyendocrine Metabolic Ovarian Syndrome says, start with the hormones, start with metabolism, look at the whole system. That is a completely different diagnostic approach, and it matters so much for the women who never fit that textbook picture. Now let's talk about what happens if this gets missed or minimally managed, because the long-term consequences of undertreated PMOS are really serious. Because what happens is we see significant elevated risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, gestational diabetes, endometrial cancer, and debilitating mental health conditions. This is not something to manage with a prescription, here you go, and a follow-up in like 6 months. This is a condition that deserves real, sustained, root cause attention for life. So I want to shift a little because I really want to talk about what I'm going to call the dismissal epidemic. Because before we talk about solutions, I think it's important to name what has happened clearly, directly, and really without sugarcoating it, because you know me, how often do I sugarcoat? So for generations, women with PMOS have been dismissed, as I mentioned. They've been gaslit, reduced to feel like crap, undertreated, and it has caused real, measurable, lasting harm. The standard of care response to PCOS for decades has been, in most cases, one of three things: the birth control pill, metformin, and more recently, guess what? Weight loss recommendations, which also comes with the subtext: if you just ate less and moved more, this would all sort itself out. I can't tell you how many young women, like teenagers to young adults, were told this by their doctors, and they came into my office crying. So I want to take a second to talk about each of these options because I think it's important. So let's start with the birth control pill. So the birth control pill can suppress symptoms. It regulates cycles. It can reduce androgen-related symptoms like acne and facial hair. And for some women, in some circumstances, it has a legitimate role in short-term symptom management. Not long-term, short-term, right? But here's what the pill does not and cannot do. It does not address insulin resistance. It does not resolve the underlying neuroendocrine disruption. It does not improve metabolic function. In fact, some formulations of the pill can actually make insulin sensitivity worse, and they also cause significant nutritional deficiencies. So the other thing is when a woman stops the pill, every symptom comes roaring back because the root cause was never touched. So handing a woman with PMOS a birth control prescription and calling it treatment is not treatment. That is symptom suppression, and women deserve to know the difference. All right, so let's also talk about the elephant in the room, right? The GLP-1 question, because I get bombarded with this every day, okay? This is the newest chapter in the story. And can these GLP-1 medications be a solution? Yes, but here's my honest, nuanced take on this. GLP-1 receptor agonists work by mimicking a gut hormone that stimulates insulin secretion. It reduces glucagon and it slows gastric emptying, and it suppresses appetite. They can improve blood sugar regulation, they facilitate weight loss, and in doing so can reduce some of the downstream hormonal disruptions in PMOS. And for some women, particularly those with significant insulin resistance and obesity-related metabolic dysfunction, they may have a role as part of a comprehensive protocol. But, and this is a significant but, okay, prescribing a GLP-1 and calling it done is repeating the same mistake we made with the birth control pill. It is treating the downstream without addressing the upstream. It's not resolving inflammatory drivers, the gut dysbiosis, and in some cases, GLP-1s can make gut dysbiosis worse, okay? It's not resolving the HPA axis dysregulation, that stress cortisol dysregulation. It's not addressing any nutritional deficiencies, nor the environmental toxic burden that we carry, or the stress physiology. All of the things that created the insulin resistance in the first place, it cannot manage, okay? And then there are real questions about long-term dependency. What happens when women stop these medications? What has been done to heal the underlying foundation? Because if the answer is, oh, nothing, then guess what? The condition's going to come back. It'll always come back. So women with PMOS deserve more than just a prescription. They deserve a practitioner who asks, why is your body doing this? And then actually gets busy looking for the answer. Let's talk about the emotional toll of being dismissed, because this is real. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge something that doesn't show up in labs, but is really real. The experience of being dismissed, of showing up in a doctor's office, describing real life-altering symptoms, and being told, oh, it's not that serious, or here's a pill, or you need to lose weight. This really takes a toll on a woman's sense of self, her trust in her own body, her self-confidence, and her faith in the medical system itself. Many women with PMOS describe years of feeling like they were being overdramatic, that something was wrong with them emotionally rather than physiologically, that if they just tried harder, oh my God, I can't tell you how often I heard this, that if they just tried harder, ate less, stressed less, that their body would cooperate. The mental health piece of PMOS is real and it runs deep. Research shows significantly elevated rates of anxiety, depression, and disordered eating in women with PMOS. Like, no shit, okay? Partly from the condition's biological effects on brain chemistry and stress hormones, right? There is biology here. And partially from the lived experience of navigating a medical system that hasn't taken them seriously and completely dismissed them. So if that has been your experience, I want to say this clearly. Your body was not lying to you. Your symptoms, your intuition, they were real. The framework used to understand and treat them, that is what was inadequate. That is not your fault. And you truly deserve a different kind of care. So what does the name change mean for medical culture? Like, in renaming this condition to PMOS, it has implications that I think ripple far beyond the semantics of it. When a condition is classified as primarily gynecological, it gets the gynecologist. When it's classified as Polyendocrine Metabolic Syndrome, suddenly endocrinologists, cardiologists, metabolic medicine specialists, mental health practitioners, and nutritional scientists all have a stake in it, right? Research funding follows different pathways, which is great. Medical education changes. Clinical guidelines in 195 countries get updated. And honestly, that is meaningful progress. And I don't want to minimize that. But, and there is a but, I also have to tell you something, because I have watched too many women navigate the specialist carousel and come out on the other side more confused, more frustrated, and more fragmented than when they started. And I think the PMOS name change, if we're not careful, could create a whole new version of the very same problem. And here's what I mean. Look, a wolf in sheep's clothing is still a wolf. The condition gets a better name, more specialists get involved, and a woman ends up bouncing between an endocrinologist, a cardiologist, a gynecologist, and a dermatologist. Each one is an expert in their slice of that picture, each one handing her a prescription for their part of the puzzle. And guess what? Nobody, not one of them, is stepping back to ask the essential question: what is driving all of this, right? That question is the heart of functional medicine. And it is why I believe functional medicine practitioners are uniquely and maybe even exclusively positioned to deliver the kind of care that PMOS actually demands. Not because we know more than the specialists, but because we are trained to see across all of them, to follow the thread from gut health to hormone metabolism, from insulin signaling to adrenal function, from sleep disruption to inflammatory load, and to find where the story actually begins. That is root cause medicine. And for women with PMOS, it is the difference between a new label and an old approach, and genuine, lasting healing. Okay, so let's go on to the root cause approach. What does healing actually look like? Okay, because we've talked about what went wrong. We have talked about what's actually happening in the body. Now let's talk about what healing looks like, because this is where I get excited. And this is where the real power lies. Because PMOS, look, it is not a life sentence. It is not a fixed state. It is a dynamic metabolic neuroendocrine pattern that with the right intervention can be profoundly shifted. I've seen it happen, and the science supports it. So I want you to really leave this episode knowing that the path forward is not just manage your symptoms for the rest of your life. The path forward is healing the root, healing the foundation. So let's go step by step, because step one, testing that actually tells the story, because you cannot treat what you have not properly assessed. And standard PMOS workups in conventional medicine, I will tell you, fall woefully short. Here's what a comprehensive functional medicine evaluation for PMOS should include. Fasting insulin, not just fasting glucose, not just hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin, and if need be, right, depending upon what those results are, a 2-hour insulin response test, because this tells you how your body is actually responding to glucose at the hormonal level. And this is truly a paradigm shift that the 2025 paper called for. Move from a glucose-centric model to an insulin-centric assessment. We need a full hormone panel. This means your androgens, total and free testosterone, DHES, androstenedione, right? It means that LH and FSH, we need to look at the ratio, not just luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormones, right? It means looking at estradiol, progesterone, across the cycle, not just in a snapshot. We need to look at prolactin, and we have to look at sex hormone binding globulin, that SHBG, because that tells you how much active, unbound androgen is actually circulating. We really need to look at something called the Dutch test. That's a dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. It's a game changer for PMOS assessment, and we order this all the time, right? It shows not just hormone levels, but hormone metabolism. How is estrogen being broken down? How is it being cleared? How is cortisol being produced and cleared? What does the full diurnal cortisol pattern look like? This is the kind of detail that allows for precision intervention. Then there's thyroid function, a complete panel, not just TSH, free T3, free T4, reverse T3, and thyroid antibodies, because thyroid dysfunction and PMOS frequently coexist. And an underactive thyroid will make metabolic recovery significantly harder. Next, we look at inflammatory markers. High sensitivity, or HS-CRP, C-reactive protein, homocysteine, ferritin, right? If we can get things like oxidized LDL and other inflammation markers, great. But those are so important, because chronic inflammation is both a driver and a consequence of PMOS, and it needs to be measured and addressed. Then we look at a comprehensive gut assessment, a stool analysis that evaluates the microbiome diversity, presence of pathogenic organisms, intestinal permeability markers, short-chain fatty acid production, and digestive enzyme function, because you can't ignore the gut in PMOS. And we look at micronutrients, your nutritional status, things like vitamin D and magnesium and zinc and B12 and folate and iron and antioxidants and heavy metals, right? Many of these nutrients that are most critical to insulin signaling, to hormone production, and stress resilience. And oftentimes these are chronically depleted in women with PMOS. We look at a cardiometabolic panel, and a lot of times these are all just combined, right? The cardiometabolic panel with the thyroid, it's all on one test. So it's not always separate tests. And with us, oftentimes this is covered under insurance, because I know it sounds like I'm rattling off a ton of tests, right? But I just want you to understand the sequence of how we need to look at that and all of the things that we need to look at that is not currently or are not currently being measured, right? So a cardiometabolic includes a full lipid panel, including your ApoB, your triglycerides, your HDL, your LDL particle size, not just LDLs. You need blood pressure assessment. We talked about the fasting glucose because long-term cardiovascular and metabolic risk of PMOS is real and it needs to be tracked, okay? So when you have this complete picture, you're not guessing, you're targeting. You're practicing personalized medicine, and that is what every woman with PMOS deserves. All right, that was step one. Let's go on to step two. Let's talk about food as medicine that is completely non-negotiable and truthfully, it's powerful, okay? Because nutrition is not an afterthought in PMOS care. It is a primary therapeutic intervention across the board, okay? But let's be specific about what that means. The foundation here is blood sugar regulation. Everything else builds on this because if blood sugar is spiking and crashing through the day, insulin is spiking and crashing. And then your androgens are being driven up, inflammation's being triggered, and the HPA axis is being activated. So you cannot out-supplement unstable blood sugar pattern, okay? You can't exercise your way around it. You have to get the blood sugar stable first. So what does that look like practically? Every meal, every snack should be built around some kind of protein. I don't necessarily think, look, I don't want you eating 5 times a day, like all that protein, okay? But it really should be built around protein and fiber-rich complex carbohydrates, not refined carbohydrates. You want to start the day with a healthy meal within the first hour or two of waking because that sets insulin tone for the day. Stop doing this fasting. Stop waking up, drinking your coffee, exercising, going to work, and then first eating at noon. Like that is a glucose, insulin, cortisol nightmare, okay? So managing meal timing with awareness, not obsessively, but intentionally, right? Anti-inflammatory eating should be a core principle. What does that mean? It means prioritizing colorful, diverse vegetables. I want you to aim for 30 or more different plant foods per week. Oh yes, 30 or more. Most people get barely 5, I think, okay? And why? Well, because A, different foods give you different nutrients, and it's so important for microbiome and gut diversity. You want to include omega-3 rich foods like wild salmon and sardines and anchovies, things like flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds. Like you don't have to go out and take a separate omega-3. Those foods give you enough of it. You want to eat your healthy fats, your avocado, your nuts, your seeds, okay? You want to do your oils to a minimum, right? The liquid processed oils. You want to get adequate protein from clean sources, things like your legumes and your whole grains, like those should be your carbohydrate foundations, not refined grains and sugars. We know that there are specific foods that have evidence in PMOS, so let's talk about those. So spearmint tea, oh yeah, seriously, okay. Spearmint tea has actually been shown in studies to reduce free testosterone levels with regular consumption. All right, so that's important. So everybody go out and get your spearmint tea. Organic, okay? Flaxseed, we know flax seeds support androgen metabolism. Your cruciferous vegetables help support estrogen detoxification and provide you with sulforaphane, which is a great, super powerful genetic modulator and antioxidant. Berries are potent anti-inflammatory and insulin sensitizing foods. And cinnamon has direct insulin sensitizing effects. And what do we want to remove or radically minimize? Ultra processed foods for sure. Things that come out of a box, things that come out of a package. Your refined sugars and your high fructose corn syrup, this is a must. Your diet sodas, your regular sodas, stay away from them because artificial sweeteners wreak havoc on your microbiome, on your metabolism. They don't just do nothing, okay? You want to avoid the industrial seed oils, your vegetable oil, your canola oil, your soybean oil. All of those drive inflammation. So do refined grains, and so does alcohol. You gotta watch your alcohol consumption here. And really, one thing that's so important is your exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals in your food. We've heard this lately. If you guys haven't watched a show, documentary on Netflix, I believe, called Plastic Detox, every woman who is labeled as PCOS or PMOS needs to watch that show. Plastic Detox. It is so fascinating because it talks about exposure to what we call these endocrine disrupting chemicals. And they're in foods, they're in the packaging, they're in conventional produce. This means also what you store. I mean, we can get into a whole, and we will get into a whole conversation about this, but food specifically, you want to choose organic when it matters. I will tell you, you want to choose organic. If you're eating produce, right, your fresh fruits and vegetables, there is the environmental working group, Dirty Dozen. I'm going to tell you, you need to have organic produce. That should be a non-negotiable, period, end of story. Because you can't rinse off these pesticides. They're in the soil. It's in the actual food themselves, and it matters, okay? If you want to take a look, the environmental working group, ewg.org, has a Dirty Dozen list, so you can check that out. But you want to avoid plastics in your food storage. Definitely when you're heating foods, try not to use a microwave, but if you do, use glass containers. So I want to be crystal clear here. This is not a diet. I am going to repeat that. This is not a diet. This is a relationship with food that honors your biology. This is not about deprivation. No deprivation here, right? This is nourishment. This is abundance and color and flavor, and you should take genuine pleasure in eating. I know I do. And you want to eat in alignment with what your body actually needs to thrive. Okay, on to step 3. Movement that heals, not harms. Okay, exercise is medicine for PMOS, but the type of exercise matters enormously. And this is where conventional advice has often made things worse. Strength training, resistance training, lifting weights is the single most evidence-supported form of exercise for improving insulin sensitivity. Yes, lifting weights is the single most evidence-supported form of exercise for improving insulin sensitivity. Muscle is your primary glucose disposal site. Think of your muscle as the gas tank. The bigger the tank, the more sugar your body can burn instead of store. The more metabolically active muscle tissue you have, the better your cells respond to insulin, right? Even 2 to 3 sessions of strength training per week creates meaningful improvement in insulin sensitivity and hormonal balance. High intensity interval training, that HIIT training, in moderate doses can be beneficial for metabolic function. But the key word is moderate. You should not be doing HIIT training daily because that will burn out your adrenals, okay? And here's where many women with PMOS have been steered wrong. Excessive chronic cardio, think daily long distance running, daily intense spin classes. These can actually worsen your HPA axis dysregulation. It will spike cortisol chronically. That means it's going to happen over and over. It's chronic cortisol spikes. And it exacerbates the very hormonal imbalances that exercise is intended to address. Okay, so this is especially true for women who already have elevated cortisol or adrenal dysfunction issues. The other thing, walking is profoundly underrated. A 15 to 20 minute walk after meals has been shown in multiple studies to meaningfully reduce post-meal blood sugar spikes. Look, it's free, it helps to keep cortisol low, it's accessible, it's powerful, so please don't underestimate walking. And look, yoga and Pilates offer dual benefits. They build strength and support the nervous system, but they will not build muscle the way resistance work does. So you can bring them into the mix, right? And It's really great for women who have PMOS, who also have significant stress physiology, but shouldn't be the only thing. So the goal is consistent, joyful, sustainable movement. This should not be punishment. It's not about performance, and it's not compensation for eating. You cannot out-exercise what you eat. It's just the body doesn't work like that. It's not calories in, calories out through exercise. I can tell you physiologically that is so inaccurate, okay? And we've proven that. But movement should act as a monitor or should be an act itself of self-care because it is metabolic medicine. Okay, step 4, sleep. Let's talk about this because it is the non-negotiable metabolic intervention because our culture has spent decades treating sleep as optional. Like, oh, it's a luxury or it's a sign of laziness. I've had people say that to me, okay? But the science is absolutely unambiguous. That is one of the most powerful, sleep is one of the most powerful metabolic interventions that is available to us. And I'm going to give you one number that I really, really want you to listen to, okay? One night of 4 to 5 hours of sleep creates measurable insulin resistance the next day. Okay, I'll say that again. One night of just 4 to 5 hours of sleep creates measurable insulin resistance the next day. This is not hearsay. This is science, okay? So it's not after months of deprivation. It is one night. So for a woman whose body is already navigating disrupted insulin signaling, that's not a minor data point. That is like the flashing red light. Because what is actually happening while you sleep? Let's talk about that. It's so important, and I think so many people don't know this. Your body goes into full repair mode. Your growth hormone, which is responsible for cellular regeneration and metabolic balance, is secreted in its largest pulses. It pulses during deep sleep. So if you're not getting deep sleep, guess what? You're not getting these surges. Cortisol, which has been running the show all day, begins its reset. It starts to prep for a healthy morning rise that literally anchors your hormonal rhythm, right? But your brain activates a remarkable clearance system. So it flushes those things out. It flushes out inflammatory byproducts, like the kind that when they accumulate, drive neuroinflammation and systemic inflammation that are already problems in PMOS and in other places too. So sleep is where healing happens. And here is what makes this especially layered for women with PMOS. The condition itself sabotages sleep because those elevated androgens disrupt sleep architecture, which is basically the quality and the depth of the cycles your body moves through overnight. So dysregulated cortisol patterns mean that the nervous system doesn't fully downshift when it should. It doesn't calm down when it should. So the actual condition steals the very thing the body needs to heal from it, right? Which means sleep has to become non-negotiable. 7 to 9 hours per night. The same sleep and wake time every day. Because in truth, guess what? Your circadian rhythm doesn't give a shit about your weekend plans. It doesn't give a shit about your vacation, okay? You want to be in a bedroom that is cool, that is dark, and screen-free. No devices in the hour before you go to bed. No scrolling, no TikToking, okay? We want intentional evening light management, right? Because the frequency of the light sends your brain like signals to determine the hormonal environment you sleep in. So it's bright, right? Your brain's going to be going. But the dim lights, right, help your brain say, oh, it's time to relax. So these aren't just wellness suggestions with women for PMOS. These are clinical prescriptions, right? And they need to be treated as such. Let's talk about step 5, stress physiology, the missing piece that changes everything. And I know we've talked about stress, but I'm going to talk about it again because this is so important. Because we talked about the HPA axis and stress response system and how chronically elevated cortisol feeds directly into the insulin androgen loop that drives PMOS. Now I want to talk about what we actually do with that information, because this is the piece that most PMOS appointments never get anywhere near. Physicians are not talking about this, and it may be the most leveraged intervention available. So there's a field called psychoneuroimmunology. That is the science of how your mind, your nervous system, and your immune system talk to each other constantly, in real time, in both directions. It's a 2-lane highway. And the conclusion of decades of research in this field is not subtle. We know that chronic psychological and emotional stress is a direct driver of inflammatory and metabolic disease. This is not a risk factor any longer. It is a driver. So your body, for all of its extraordinary intelligence, cannot tell the difference between a genuine physical emergency and your thoughts that go spiraling down at midnight or 2 a.m., okay? The stress response does not have a credibility filter, right? Worry, fear, unresolved grief, a difficult relationship, financial anxiety, the cumulative weight of feeling dismissed by the medical system for years, guess what? All of it lands in the body, the same way a genuine physical threat might. So cortisol, insulin, androgens, inflammation, gut permeability, immune dysregulation, triggered by thoughts and emotions that nobody ever measured on a lab panel and nobody addressed and treated. Which means for women with PMOS, nervous system regulation is not just a stress management tip. It is biochemistry. It directly moves the numbers that matter. Here's what that looks like practically. Diaphragmatic breathing, slow, intentional belly breathing from the diaphragm. This is the fastest, most accessible tool we have for directly down-regulating the stress response. Things like box breathing, that 4-7-8, inhale 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. Even just slowing the exhale to be longer than the inhale, 5 minutes of this, 5 minutes, measurably shifts cortisol and heart rate variability, right? No prescription required, 5 minutes. Meditation and mindfulness. This extends like the effect, when you're in meditation or you practice mindfulness, this extends the effect that the breathing has, right? We train the nervous system over time to spend less of its time in low-grade threat mode, right? We train the system to not go into its default state, which is low-grade threat mode. We got to get out of that. Look, time in nature, and I'm going to say this as someone who gardens and loves to grow my own food when the iguanas are not eating it, okay? I genuinely believe that being out in nature, it's been proven, my hands in the soil is medicine. This does something to the nervous system that is hard to really articulate. So you don't have to necessarily get your hands dirty, but getting out in nature. There's a practice called tree bathing, getting out and being around the trees. It really does something to the nervous system. But it's easy to measure. It's hard to maybe articulate, but it is easy to measure. It's like when you go to the beach. Don't you feel different when you go to the beach? You're listening to the waves, you're in the sun, in the sand. Like when your body is on the ground, your feet are on the ground, that grounding. It causes cortisol to drop. Blood pressure drops. Like this has been measured. The sympathetic nervous system starts to down-regulate. The sympathetic nervous system is that go, 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 right? Nature is a healing environment. Use it. Get out in the morning sun, 5 minutes. Just look at the sun, let the sun beam on you. I mean, we're going into summer and it's a great time, okay? The other thing is heart math. Heart math research is something that I really want every woman with PMOS to know about. Heart-brain, right? Coherence is the synchronized state between your heart's rhythmic pattern and your brain's electrical activity. And it is achievable through intentional practices involving genuine positive emotion. Things like appreciation and gratitude and self-care. Not performed, but felt. It's that feeling, okay? Because when you get there, cortisol drops. regenerative hormones rise, immune function improves, and endocrine regulation improves, right? That hormone regulation. It is reproducible. It's measurable. And guess what? It's free. You don't have to invest in heart math. You can just do some of these things. And this is physiology. This is real physiology, not just philosophy, people, okay? And the trauma piece. Look, I am not going to dance around this. I am going to tell you that a significant number of women with PMOS have a history of adverse experiences that have kept their nervous system in chronic low-grade activation for years. And it's not just people with PMOS, people in general who have chronic low-grade activation. For even most of their lives, it wreaks havoc on the nervous system, right? It's a nervous system that's always bracing, always scanning for a threat. It's always producing cortisol, and it's always feeding into this loop. Things like somatic therapy, somatic breath work, EMDR, trauma-informed psychotherapy, these directly address nervous system dysregulation at the root. So for the women who need this work, it is not an add-on. This stuff is foundational because the body keeps score. The science confirmed what the healers have always known. And for many women with PMOS, the hormonal healing and the emotional healing are not two separate journeys. They are one. Let's talk about step 6, evidence-based nutraceuticals and botanicals, because targeted supplementation based on comprehensive testing can be profoundly supportive in PMOS. And I want to highlight some of the most evidence-based options, things like inositol, specifically the combination of myo-inositol and D-chiroinositol in, let's call it a 40-to-1 ratio, is the most researched, most effective, and most underutilized intervention in PMOS. We know that multiple clinical trials demonstrate that inositol improves insulin signaling, reduces androgen levels, restores ovulatory function, and improves egg quality. So for many women, especially those wanting to conceive, this is a game-changing option with truly an excellent safety profile. And I'm going to talk about dosage. Like, you don't want to just randomly start taking this stuff, guys, and dosing it yourself. We really do need to do testing before you start throwing supplements. But I think it's important to understand that there are supplements out there. Things like berberine, for example, is a plant alkaloid that acts through multiple pathways to improve insulin sensitivity. In fact, several studies have compared it favorably to metformin in terms of glucose lowering, and with the added benefit of having truly positive impacts on the gut microbiome composition. Magnesium glycinate or magnesium threonate, right? Because magnesium is involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body, including insulin signaling. Okay, it's chronically depleted in women with PMOS, and repleting it supports both metabolic function and sleep quality and nervous system regulation. Zinc is another one, critical for androgen metabolism, immune function, and skin health, and again is often depleted as we see in PMOS. N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, is a precursor to glutathione, the body's master antioxidant. It reduces oxidative stress, improves insulin sensitivity, and it has shown good promise for improving ovulation and hormonal balance in women with PMOS. Vitamin D, this is a powerhouse. Most women with PMOS are deficient in vitamin D, and vitamin D functions as a hormone in the body. It directly influences insulin signaling, immune regulation, mood, and ovarian function. Testing and optimizing vitamin D is low cost and super high impact. It's a great intervention, but you got to test, okay? Adaptogenic herbs, things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil, these support the HPA axis and help modulate the cortisol response without suppressing it unnaturally. So these aren't stimulants or sedatives. They're literally tonics that help the stress response system find a healthy set point. Something else, saw palmetto for women with significant androgen excess and symptoms like hair loss and hirsutism, because this inhibits the conversion of testosterone, which is the more potent form of DHT. Spearmint, as I mentioned, both as a tea and extract, has been shown to reduce free androgen levels in women with PMOS through what we call an anti-androgenic mechanism. So as I mentioned, supplementation should be targeted based on testing and ideally guided by a knowledgeable practitioner More is not always better. And I can tell you that from experience with so many clients. More is not better. Interactions matter, and the quality of the supplements vary enormously. So for women with PMOS, a thoughtfully designed nutraceutical protocol alongside food, movement, sleep, and stress can be transformative. And let's talk about step 7, the mind, body, energy dimension. So I want to step into something that really sits at the very core of how I practice and how I understand healing. And I want you to stay with me here, because what I'm about to say is truly grounded in science, because we are not just physical bodies processing biochemicals. I believe with every part of me, and I've been talking about this so often and so much, but what healers across every culture and every era have known is that we are energetic, conscious beings, and our inner world, our thoughts, our beliefs, our emotional patterns, the stories we carry about ourselves is not separate from our biology. It is woven into it. Things like epigenetics and genetics is part of the science that made this undeniable for me, right? This discovery that gene expression is not fixed, that which genes get turned on and which genes get turned off is dynamically shaped by environment, experience, and the internal landscape we live in. It changed so much about how I understand disease and healing, because your genes are not a sentence, they are a conversation. And you're always, whether you know it or not, participating in that conversation through every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every story you believe about yourself and your body. For women with PMOS, this is both a sobering truth and the most liberating thing I know. The diagnosis does not determine the destiny. The terrain, the foundation does. And you have far more influence over the terrain than anyone ever told you. But I also need to name something honestly, because many women with PMOS have spent years living inside a story that was handed to them by a medical system that didn't have good enough answers. The story that something was going on but couldn't be fixed. They've been told, oh, this is how it is. There's not much to be done beyond managing symptoms. And that story, held long enough, believed deeply enough, is not just painful. It's physiological. It becomes you. Chronic hopelessness, self-criticism, the quiet resignation of someone who has stopped expecting to get better, these activate inflammatory pathways. They dysregulate the stress response. They suppress immune function. They feed the exact hormonal and metabolic loop that drives PMOS deeper. The body believes what the mind rehearses. I'm going to say that again. The body believes what the mind rehearses. I want to be unmistakably clear on this, because this is not a blame statement. Not even slightly, okay? The story was given to these women by doctors who were using an incomplete framework, by a medical culture that named a complex, a systemic condition after the wrong body part and treated it accordingly for 80 years. It's time to rewrite this script, because if the mind participates in driving disease and the science of psychoneuroimmunology, epigenetics, genetics, and the neuroscience of belief says unambiguously that it does, right? We know that it does. Then the mind participates in driving healing. So your mind is so powerful. It can drive one direction or the other. And we know that neuroplasticity shows us that the brain can rewire throughout life. Heart coherence research shows us that the heart generates an electromagnetic field that communicates with literally every organ system in the body, and that this field can be deliberately, intentionally shifted through authentic emotional practice. Visualization studies show measurable changes in immune markers, hormone levels, and cellular function from the power of intentional, directed thought. Quantum biology is beginning to map these mechanisms by which consciousness and matter are not as separate as we had always assumed, right? These are not fringe ideas anymore. They are the emerging edge of science, and they are catching up one study at a time to what the greatest healers in human history understood in their bones. And in my practice, I do all of the functional medicine work, the comprehensive testing, the nutrition, the protocols, and I also sit with women and ask the questions that I believe matter just as much. What do you believe about your body? What have you been told about what is possible for you? What story are you living inside? And is it true? Is it serving your healing? Because reclaiming the narrative is not separate from healing PMOS. For many women, it is the heart of it. The shift from I have a broken hormonal difficult body that is working against me to I have an intelligent, adaptive, extraordinary body that has been responding to real challenges, and it is completely capable of healing. That shift is not positive thinking as a substitute for medicine. It is a biological event. It changes the internal environment. It changes gene expression. It changes what the protocols land on and what becomes possible. The body is always listening to the story the mind is telling. And when we change the story with intention, with compassion, with the understanding that healing is not just possible, but it is the body's deepest nature, the body begins to write a different ending. So what can you do right now? Because we have covered a ton of ground today. And I want to bring it home with some very practical, actionable guidance, because information without application doesn't change anyone's life. So 3 questions to ask your doctor. If you have PMOS or suspect you might, here are 3 questions to ask your practitioner that will tell you very quickly whether they are thinking about the condition in the right way. Question 1, will you test my fasting insulin, not just my blood sugar? If the answer is no, besides running, right? Or if they tell you it's not necessary because your glucose looks fine, that's information. A provider who understands PMOS knows that insulin resistance precedes glucose dysregulation, sometimes by years or decades, and that fasting insulin is an essential part of the evaluation, okay? Question 2, what is your approach to addressing the root cause of my hormonal and metabolic disruption? If the answer is primarily pharmacological, meaning the pill or metformin or maybe even a GLP-1, without any discussion of nutrition or gut health or stress or sleep or targeted supplementation and the full neuroendocrine picture, you're not getting root cause care. You're getting symptom management, and you deserve to know the difference. Question 3, how are you going to support my long-term cardiometabolic health, not just my reproductive health? Because PMOS is a lifelong condition with significant long-term implications for heart health, metabolic function, and cognitive health. Any provider who is only focused on your periods and your fertility is only seeing part of the picture. You deserve comprehensive longitudinal care. Because the difference between managing and healing, let's draw a very clear distinction here because it matters. Because I think this could make the difference between a woman spending the next 20 years managing a condition or even spending the next 2 years healing one, right? The difference of managing a condition for 20 years or spending and investing the time in 2 years to heal one. Because managing PMOS and healing PMOS are not the same thing, not even close. Managing means the symptoms are just quieted while the fire underneath keeps burning. You feel better enough to function, your doctor is satisfied with your numbers, but guess what? The insulin resistance is still there. The gut is still dysbiotic. The HPA axis is still dysregulated, and the inflammatory drivers are still running. And because none of that has changed, the medication or the interventions that are keeping the symptoms quiet have to keep running too, meaning you're on medications indefinitely because the terrain, the foundation that created the symptoms was never addressed. And that is not treatment, that is maintenance of a sick system. And women deserve to know the difference before they sign up with it, because healing means going to the source. Insulin sensitivity restored through food, through movement, through sleep, through targeted nutraceuticals, and stress physiology work. Gut microbiome needs to be rebuilt so that hormone metabolism and immune regulation can normalize. Cortisol patterns need to be regulated so they stop feeding the androgens. The body nourished with what it actually needs and systematically cleared of what's working against it. The emotional terrain addressed, the years of dismissal, the internalized narrative of something is wrong, the nervous system that learned to brace because the foundation is biology too. And over time, in a body whose foundation has genuinely shifted, ovulation becomes natural. Hormones find balance. Metabolism works efficiently. Energy and clarity and the sense of living in a body that is on your side, guess what? All of those come back as the real thing. I've seen it repeatedly in women who came to me so skeptical and exhausted after years of being told their options were limited. I have watched insulin levels normalize. I have watched testosterone drop without a single medication. I have watched women who hadn't had a regular cycle in decades start cycling naturally. And I have watched skin clear, weight release, mood stabilize, and women who look at their lab results with something I can only describe as disbelief and relief happening at the same time, right? It's not magic. This is root cause medicine done comprehensively, consistently, and with genuine respect for the complexity of the person being treated. So hear this. Your body is not working against you. It is working exactly as it was designed to, responding intelligently to the inputs it's been given. And when you change the inputs with knowledge, intention, and the right support, the body responds. It always responds every single time, because that is what living, intelligent, adaptive biological systems do when you give it what it needs. Here's a message to every woman who has been dismissed. If you have spent years being told that your symptoms aren't serious enough, that your labs look fine, that you should just lose weight, that this is just how it is, I want to speak directly to you. Your body wasn't lying. Your experience was real. The suffering was real. The frustration was real. The grief of not being taken seriously, that was all real. The renaming of this condition from PCOS to PMOS is not just semantic update. It is medicine acknowledging that the framework was wrong, that the approach was incomplete, that millions of women were underseen and underserved, not because they were exaggerating, but because the lens that was being used to look at them was focused in the wrong place, on the wrong things. And the fact that 22,000 people, patients, advocates, clinicians came together over 14 years to demand a more accurate, more defined, more complete understanding of this condition, that is extraordinary. That is what it looks like when patients refuse to be dismissed, when science catches up with the lived experience, when the conversation changes, and the conversation has changed. Now it is time for the care to follow. So here's what I want you to do after this episode. I want you to share it with the women in your life who have been struggling with irregular cycles, with unexplained weight gain, with hair loss or skin changes, with fertility challenges, with mood instability, with fatigue that nobody can explain, with women who have been told, you're fine and you know you're not. Advocate for yourself or the people you love. Ask for the comprehensive testing. Seek out a root cause practitioner, a functional medicine practitioner, nutritionist, an integrative provider who can look at the whole picture, not just the piece that fits neatly on a standard lab report. And believe, really believe that healing is possible, not because I say so, but because the science says so, because the biology says so, because the extraordinary intelligence of the human body, your body, says so. PMOS is not a life sentence. It is a message from a brilliant, adaptive body that something in the terrain needs attention. And when you give it that attention with the right tools, the right support, the right mindset, the body knows what to do. I thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for caring enough about your health or the health of someone you love to spend more than an hour going deep on this, okay? But there was a lot to say, right? So if this episode moved you, please share it, leave a review, and let other women find it because they need to hear this. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to work through what a comprehensive root cause approach to your own PMS looks like, I'm here. The links are in the notes. And as always, take care of yourselves. You deserve it. And as always, take care of yourselves. You deserve it. I will see you in the next episode. This is your Rebel Nutritionist signing off. Make it a great day, everybody.